Hello, I am Basher, and welcome to the Basher Media channel. Today I'm going to be introducing a recurring series on the stream and possibly in videos here on the channel. This is going to be a alternate universe college football 26 slow simulation series. And for this, I have made 7 custom conferences to better reflect the regionality of college football in the United States. Here we can see the breakdown of the 7 major conferences that will also have 3 minor conferences below them that kind of feed into them, and that's also set up off of a regional basis. So to start, we have the Pac-12, a traditional power that has fallen on very hard times, kind of revitalizing with the teams that are coming in this year for 2026. But anyways, for this series, we are going to have Washington, Oregon, California, and Nevada, as well as Hawaii, included in the Pac-12 conference, and I think their minor league, as well as the Mountain West and the Big 12, is going to be the Middle American Conference. That brings us to the Mountain West, which is going to move up in a sense. It's never really been considered a power conference. There was a time where it was a contender in a sense because of TCU and Boise State, but really hasn't been. Well, Boise State did play, get a bye week and college football playoffs, right? So they've been around, but now they're going to get a real large injection of talent. Here we are going to include Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri. A large amount of states, but it is a pretty good balancing of teams once we get into how these conferences break down on a team basis. That brings us to the Big 12, a traditional power that has stayed relevant, but hasn't necessarily won any championships like the SEC, Big 10, and ACC have in recent history. For this series, it's going to be Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Next up is the Big 10. This is another traditional power, but this one has been very relevant. As of late, they've won the last 2 championships with Indiana and Ohio State. In this one, they only have Indiana from that, but I think once you see the teams that are included, you'll see this is a pretty interesting conference. And the states that are going to be included here are Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee. The next one is the SEC, considered to be the best conference in America. Even though they haven't won the last 2 championships, they always have very, very strong teams, some of the best recruiting. In this series, they lose a lot of talent, but keep some of the largest players in the history of the conference and some new powers. And the states are going to be Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. The second to last one is going to be the American Conference, which, like the Mountain West, is moving up into a more relevant air as a major conference. I see a couple of states that I think I shouldn't have included as far as calling, but that's irrelevant. The states that will be included are going to be New York, Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. I know. Oh, and Connecticut. Yeah, UConn is in there. That brings us to the last conference, which is the ACC, and has a lot of talent. Is going to be a very strong school to start out with and long term. And the states that you will see there are Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And this is really how the major and minor conference system is going to work. I touched on it briefly, but this is the more in-depth explanation. So on the left, we have the ACC and SEC, with the minor conference being the Sun Belt Conference. And how this will work is after each season, I will be looking at who the conference champion is of these 3 minor conferences. And then we will find which of the major conferences they would fit into. So, for example, I think like Florida Atlantic is in the Sun Belt Conference and Florida is in the ACC. So if they win the Sun Belt Conference and say Virginia is the worst team in the ACC that year, Virginia will go down to the Sun Belt and Florida Atlantic will move up to the ACC. And that's kind of how it works. Then any other ranked teams in the preseason will also be moved up to an associated conference. And going down the line, we have the Middle American Conference feeding into the Big 12, Mountain West, and Pac-12, and then the Conference USA feeding into the American and the Big 10. And now we are going to get into the major conferences, starting with the ACC. So the ACC, as we talked about, is those Atlantic teams, Florida through Virginia. And it's got a good mix. I mean, obviously you have traditional powers, Florida State, Georgia. Clemson's been a newer one. Miami has been around for a long time and has been good recently. Florida is a traditional power who's been, at least in real life, on hard times. Still ranked 15th in here. And then like South Carolina has been a contender here and there. Going into 2025, they have, 5 ranked teams, which I think is the most amongst the major conferences, but I could be wrong. And they have some decent depth as well. I mean, you got Virginia, who's always relevant, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, North Carolina State. It'll be an interesting conference, and we'll look at the Sun Belt when we get to the minor conferences, but like teams like Charlotte, Wake Forest, East Carolina, those are the ones that are potentially going to be looking at going down to that Sun Belt in a relegation situation. Next one is going to be the American, which arguably is the weakest from a overall strength standpoint, but there is some interesting depth as well. Obviously, you have Ohio State and Penn State, who are two traditional powers who, at least Ohio State has won a championship last year in 2024. Penn State in real life had a very tough 2025. We'll see how they do here, but you also have West Virginia, Maryland, Buffalo, Rutgers, Army, Boston College, Syracuse, Temple, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Delaware, and UConn. So like I said, not any other traditional powers outside of those top 2 teams, but who knows how it could play out. Delaware is a team coming up from the FCS. Who knows how they're going to compete. Pittsburgh has been good here and there in the ACC for a long time. Maryland is good here and there. Same with West Virginia, so it could end up being a very interesting conference. That brings us to the Big 12, which is mostly Texas dominated, but has some other schools thrown in from the other states involved. Obviously, the big name is going to be Texas. You also have Texas A&M, who was in the college football playoffs this year. Texas Tech, who was in the college football playoffs this year in real life. Then you have Arizona State, who was in the college football playoffs in 2024, actually lost to Texas. So that's kind of an interesting storyline and potential rivalry there. Then you have TCU, who was in the championship and lost to Georgia. And then you have interesting depth. You have New Mexico State from New Mexico. They're better than the Lobos overall wise, but that is something to keep an eye on if they swap places. Then you have the other Arizona school, kind of always in the mix as far as the Big 12 since they've came over. And then, the smaller Texas schools like UTSA, Texas State, North Texas, who almost made it to the college football playoffs this year. I already talked about them. Houston, Baylor. This has a lot of big names at the top, tied so far with the ACC for most ranked schools that we've seen in a major conference so far, and has some fun depth. So I'll definitely be looking forward to see how this conference plays out. Brings us to the Big 10, which I think breaks the tie for most ranked teams. Let's see, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. And while they have all those teams this year and have some good depth as well, it doesn't mean that they're going to be dominant or anything. We'll just kind of have to. I haven't ran a series like this from the start of the dynasty, so we'll see how it plays out. I did this in one that I played not that long ago, and it was a lot of fun, but some of the powers had already kind of been worked out. I was, making waves by creating a superpower at Miami and Boise State, these different things. So we'll have to see how it plays out from the beginning, maybe make adjustments for when College Football 27 comes out. But kind of a good point to talk about that since we got 6 ranked teams here. But looking over it, you got Michigan, Iowa State, Tennessee, Illinois, Indiana, and Notre Dame as the ranked teams. Obviously, some traditional powers thrown in there in Notre Dame, Tennessee, Michigan. Iowa State's been fairly relevant in some aspects. And then obviously Indiana winning the championship in real life in the year that's going to be coming up in the series. And then some fun depth like Kentucky, Wisconsin's been good for a long time. Louisville seems to be relevant all the time. Iowa is always relevant. Vanderbilt was relevant this year. Michigan State sometimes pops in the mix. Same with Minnesota. So I don't see this conference staying very stagnant. I can see a lot of moving up and down. But interestingly, might be a conference where not a whole lot of relegation is coming out of them. And coming to the newest major, them and the American, who we already talked about. I didn't say it then, but one of the new major conferences that are coming in this alternate universe series is the Mountain West Conference. Obviously have some traditional powers like Oklahoma and Nebraska. And then you have Kansas State, BYU, Utah, Oklahoma State, Boise State that are kind of in the mix recently in the last 10 or so years, 20 or so years. Kansas, Colorado, Tulsa, Utah State, Wyoming. Not the most interesting depth. I wouldn't include Missouri in that not interesting depth because they're an SEC school and have also been in the mix, even though I didn't include them in that part. And that brings us to the Pac-12, which I think if you were the people running the Pac-12, you would love to see the conference looking like this currently compared to where it is right now. But in this series, we're going to see the traditional power of Oregon, USC, kind of UCLA, kind of Stanford, being kind of the top dogs with some interesting depth in Washington State, Washington, UNLV, Oregon State, Cal, and Nevada I would kind of include in that group, and then like San Diego State, Hawaii, probably Oregon State and Fresno State being kind of the bottom dwellers more than likely going into this 2025 season, if I had to guess. But we'll have to see. USC hasn't really been that strong. They got 83 overall going into 2025, which is crazy. So I don't really see them competing right off the bat, but maybe they'll be, top 3. They have that kind of potential this season. So we'll see how it plays out long term. And that brings us to the last major conference, which is the SEC, which compared to real life loses a lot of talent, is one of the lower amount of teams with ranked teams, or one of the conferences with the lower amount of ranked teams going into 2025 with 3. But you can't forget teams like Auburn, Mississippi State, Arkansas being here. I think they will stay relevant, and I'm hoping that some of these Alabama schools and other smaller Louisiana and Mississippi schools can recruit and become relevant, hopefully. And with that, we'll get into the minor conferences. Here is the Conference USA, which feeds into the Big Ten and the American. So, interesting group. I would think that Purdue and Western Kentucky, Memphis, Toledo, would be the contenders to win this one and possibly be moving up to their respective major conferences. The next minor conference is going to be the Middle American, which has the least amount of teams, quite obviously. But this one feeds into 3 conferences, which is crazy since it has the least amount, but it feeds into the Mountain West, the Pac-12, and the Big 12. And if I had to predict, probably one of these two, maybe UTEP. It'll be close. And then the final minor conference and final conference we'll be going over today is going to be the Sun Belt that feeds into the ACC and the SEC. And similar to the MAC, quite a few teams, so good amount of chance for promotion to one of those 2 conferences. And I would think USF is in the running for that. UCF is in the running for that. Probably some teams that should have already been up there, but I'm kind of hoping that the relegation and promotion process works as intended and these teams move up and we kind of get that sorted out while still giving teams chances to improve. That's kind of the hope of this system. Unfortunately, to keep some continuity in the series, I have to choose a team that's not going to participate at all. And that's, they're going to play the games, but they're not going to be recruiting or doing very well. And that's going to be Air Force, who is the only independent. And that's about all the information that you need to know to check in on the series while I'm streaming it. Thank you for watching and enjoy.